Hey, what's going on? Back again for another video. This is going to be another rando fact type video. However, it's not going to be a quick fact ones. Remember, I said some of these are going to be quick facts, some of them are going to be kind of ish deeper dives. So, this is a deeper dive one. We got two subjects that we're going to talk about, and other than that, thank you for pulling up. Let's get into business. So, believe it or not, you may or may not be related to Genghis Khan. So let's get into that a little bit. First, let's get into his background, and after we get into his background of his rags to riches story, we can then talk about how you may or may not be related to him. Genghis Khan was born in 1162 to a tribal chief in the Henti region, which is now known as Mongolia. Only at about the age of 9, he was exiled from the tribe after one of the other people had poisoned his father. For the next 3 years, Genghis Khan and his family basically hoboed their way around the Mongolian region, looking for a place to stay, someone that would take them in, shelter. They would take food and resources from basically anyone that could help. Other than that, they were basically kind of just hunting and gathering in the wilderness. So after some time passed, Genghis eventually convinced some of his tribespeople to follow him. And believe it or not, this would be the start of something greater. So in the early beginnings, they were basically a nomadic tribe, just kind of moving from place to place. But after a while, through Genghis Khan's leadership and teachings, they became so big and so large and so resourceful that it didn't make sense for them to be nomadic anymore. So they basically had to set up shop somewhere. So after some time of finally settling down and creating an actual place for people to live, the empire kicked off. Over time, it grew to over 700 different tribes inside of the Mongolian Empire that was all under the reign of Genghis Khan. After all of this time of just getting better, improving, and expanding, the empire ended up ranging from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Sea of Japan, which by no means is a small amount of land. Under Genghis Khan's reign, he introduced very new concepts to a lot of these people that for us today, we would take as granted, but back then it was like, yo, dog, what is this? What you got going on? So some of these things included a new writing system, which is actually used today, a judicial system which gave people a fair shot in court and trial, and also he even regulated hunting to make sure that no species went exterminated. One of his biggest drives was he was extremely determined to make sure that he created a unified land and that everyone felt equal under the Mongolian Empire. One of his biggest strives was that he wanted to increase his reach, but not just increase the reach. He wanted to make it feel as though it was a unified nation and everyone inside of the Mongolian Empire felt as if it was solidarity. So, as stated earlier, right, he basically ruled over about 700 different tribes inside of this gigantic empire / nation, right? Very difficult to manage that on your own. So, how did he do it? And this is where it gets into how you may be related into Genghis Khan. So we're able to track Genghis Khan's descendants because when it comes to men, for some reason, we tend to have the same Y chromosome. So you can kind of tell who your dad is that way, I guess you could say, or something like that. I'm no geneticist, I don't know. But in just, I believe, China alone, there are over 16 million men that share the exact same Y chromosome as Genghis Khan. So the reason why all of this goes so deep and the reason why Genghis Khan had so many descendants, it's not just on him alone, but he did do a lot of reproductive stuff. So how else was it? Well, Genghis Khan had a few sons himself, and these sons also helped him run the empire, which is why he was able to manage such a large nation, is because his direct descendants were also in power and they were also running the nation as well. At least a few of his sons had double digits when it came to just the sons alone. Just one of Genghis Khan's son alone, Tushi, had 40 sons. This isn't even counting the daughters, just 40 sons alone. And then those guys went out and probably, I don't know, did more things. So yeah. And then also one of Genghis Khan's grandsons, Kublai Khan, The guy with the restaurant? No, I'm playing. But him alone also, he had 20 sons. And again, like I said, we can trace the Y chromosome. So that's how we kind of know where these people came from. So throughout all of that spread, and again, that was in the 1100s. So through all that spread over all of these years, it's safe to say that if you aren't a descendant, you probably know a descendant of Genghis Khan. So throughout all of this, most of this came about because, at the same time, they are rulers, they're leaders, but they're also diplomats. So there was a lot of traveling involved. And I'm assuming that, back then they just kind of knew who he was, like, oh, snap, that's such and such. Hope he don't got hot sauce. I'm going to do my thing. And, so they traveled around, did the thing, and really spread out their genetic gene pool. And yeah, that's how it goes. Now, it will be stated, because I know that if you know anything about Genghis Khan, there is a darker side to Genghis Khan. And don't worry, haven't forgot, I'll cover that in a separate video. But for now, that's basically the gist of how you may be related to Genghis Khan. Legend has it, in 1943, the government did a very peculiar experiment that, again, sounds absolutely disturbing, scary, crazy, and more of me wishes that this is fake than real, because it's a humdinger. In 1943, it is alleged that USS Eldridge randomly disappeared from a dock in Pennsylvania and popped up almost, instantaneously at a dock in Virginia. And according to sources, nobody knows how. The story starts with a man named Carlos having all of these mathematical equations and findings that just didn't make sense but were mind-boggling, and another man named Jessup wanted these and he was looking for them, so they kind of started exchanging information back and forth and started putting pieces of the puzzle together to talk about 1943 incident that had apparently been covered up by the US government. These mathematical equations and methods tied to a few different applications that the military was trying to utilize, test, and take advantage of at the time. These included electromagnetism, unified field theory, and even anti-gravity. Now, again, whether or not they were able to pull any of this off as of right now in 2022, we don't know. But that is apparently what these mathematical findings were that Carlos and Jessup were playing around and just so giggly about. According to Carlos, unfortunately, the government had already started cracking and discovering and mastering some of Einstein's unified field theory equations and attempts. And unfortunately, because they had already started putting it to dangerous use, according to Carlos. He claimed to have first eye witness, as in he was right there on the scene, and he witnessed the usage of this, seeing a gigantic naval ship, USS Eldridge, like I said earlier, vanish right in front of his eyes and then appear 600 kilometers away in Norfolk. The reason why this was so horrifying is, according to some of the witnesses, they saw very adverse effects to this and it didn't go as well as they planned. Initially, and I've heard two different stories about this. One is they were simply just trying to figure out how to make a cloaking device. Almost like if you look at any kind of Metal Gear Solid games or Halo, where it's, the stealth camouflage transparent thing. So I've heard some people say that they were trying to do that. They just wanted to figure out a way to cloak ships from visibly everything on radar, electromagnetic, visually, just all around, it's invisible. Other claims say that they were literally trying to do teleportation, and unfortunately they succeeded, but like I said, it had adverse effects. So what were these adverse effects and why was it so horrifying? Well, according to the claims that I believe Carlos made, some of the men on board started becoming transparent, as in you could just kind of see through them as if they were ghosts, apparitions. Some of the men just immediately went crazy and just started screaming and kind of holding their head and freaking out, and they just jumped overboard. And even more horrifying, according to these claims, Again, this is crazy. Some of these men even were merged into the ship itself. So you would be seeing hands and faces and other body parts just kind of molded into the ship and kind of just protruding from the ship. Very freaky. Very freaky. And I've even heard some claims that they saw some of these men that were stationed there. They were like inside of bars and whatnot after the event. And they were very shaken up, even to the point where someone claimed that they had seen two men get into a bar fight, and they were literally like disappearing and teleporting around the bar while they were fighting each other, which, yeah, I would have told the bartender to kind of, close me out at that point. I've had too much to drink. So, of course, in these type of findings and studies, what's one thing that is super common? That's right. No evidence. So after a while, Jessup kind of just stopped replying back to Carlos because he was like, dog, I mean, if you're going to tell me all this crazy stuff, you kind of got to back it up, because what do I look like going around and trying to go to the media and trying to tell them stuff like this? And one, if I am correct, the government's probably going to unalive me. Or two, if I'm incorrect, I'm just going to look crazy, which, I mean, either way, they could still be 100% correct. I look crazy and then they unalive me. And then, bro, you got to give me some hard evidence. So after a while, yeah, Jessup just kind of stopped talking to Carlos about it. He was like, whatever. 1956, the U.S. government actually called and summoned upon Jessup to go there and speak with him, because somehow, some way, they got copies or whatever of Carlos's writings and information about this incident, and they wanted Jessup to come there, and they wanted to see if he had any more information, which is kind of funny. I mean, if it's not real, then it's like, can't you just bury it? Like, move on? He sounds crazy already, right? And a little bit after that, there was an entity called Vero Corporation, and they actually do research specifically on the government findings, and they also published a book, and a little bit afterwards, yes, with some of Carlos' notes. So, there's that information too. Also, this should be noted, 3 years after that meeting in 1956, so 1959, fast forward 3 years, Jessup unalived himself. So, yeah, he unalived himself 3 years afterwards. Go figure. So, there is some speculation about this entire case, obviously. But one of the biggest things is just some of the times don't make up, right? So, for that ship that I spoke of, USS Eldridge, for most of that year, 1943, it was actually in New York, so it didn't make sense that it was somehow in Pennsylvania and then teleported in Virginia if it spent most of its time just stationed and docked in New York at that time. So there is a small gap of time where it may have somehow been there, but I mean, it's like almost right on top of each other with the dates. So I'm talking like literally weeks. But for most of that year, it was in New York. They did say that this happened particularly, I believe, in the month of October in 1943. And, that gives just a few months of a time window to where this strange phenomenon of an event could have happened. But other than that, it's very little evidence to even go on as to how any of this could have happened, other than some of the, accounts that people said they saw people teleporting and disappearing in a bar. Yeah, whatever you're going to do with that information. However, it is stated, though, and this is fact, that the U.S. government was actually trying to test out ways to make naval ships and other, vehicles more stealthy and undetectable. That is 100% true. They were looking for that, and we can see that even today with some of the technology we have of trying to make ships and planes and things undetectable. Now, whether or not they decided to do crazy things like wrap the ships in electrical wires and all this other crazy things to manipulate electromagnetism, gotta ask Uncle Sam about that one. Jury's still out. Other than that, I hope that I've tantalized your brains with some very peculiar topics. Tell me, how do you feel about it in the comments below? How much of this is malarkey? Do you think that you are related to Genghis Khan? Do you think that there were people merged inside of a ship? Good God, that's wheezy. But yeah, what do you think? Do you think the government is covering up some weird, peculiar experiment called the Philadelphia experiment? Do you think you got a little bit of Genghis in you? Let us know in the comments. Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic day. And of course, see you in the next one. Toodaloo.